In this segment, we're going to continue on with our Yukon Workingscape image, where we have, in the previous section, set the highlight and the shadow, and want to continue on and talk about setting brightness and contrast in our images. When we set our highlights and shadows, particularly if we have neutral areas in our image like the neutral white highlight, we did our curves adjustment on the individual layers. We come in and do overall brightness and contrast on our image. We're going to work with the master RGB curve. Typically, the way we'll do this is we're going to make our brightness adjustment here in the midtone. And one of the reasons for this is, one of the things you need to be aware of, and we talked about dot gain earlier, just in general, images tend to print darker than they appear on screen unless you have a 100% color managed workflow. So in general, I typically, and you will probably want to typically brighten your images. The question is, how much? Well, let's start. We're in the RGB, the master curve. We'll just place a point right here on the midtone. And notice when we move this up, the overall image brightens. How much do you want to move it? Well, some of it just comes from experience, but you can also use values to help you. Remember, we set the minimum white highlight at 5%, 242 on a 0 to 255 scale, and the maximum shadow at 90 to 95%. So what I like to do when I'm setting overall brightness in an image, I like to try to identify an area in my image that I think is close to what I think the midtone would be. And in this case, maybe this low-lying cloud layer that we see right here. So I'm going to go in, hold down my shift key, and I'm going to put a number 3 point right there. It doesn't have to be exact. It's not like it has to be absolutely 50%, but I'm going to try to find something that I can identify as, hey, that should be pretty close to the midtone, because I want this to be lighter and I want that to be darker, and that should be about halfway in between. And then I'll actually look at my values here. And notice the values 93, 97, 110. And I ask myself, is that lighter or darker than a midtone gray, like a 50%? Well, on a scale of 0 to 255, midtone is 128. And we can see that the 93, 97, 110 is indeed darker than 128. So we can come in, and unless we want to do color correction to make that neutral, which is not all that important here, just doing an overall brightness, we've selected our point. We can just use our up arrow and just raise this until those values are up around 128. Notice the blue value gets there first. So we can raise this overall until maybe the green value, the one that's in between, gets up around 128. So we can use that to help us determine overall brightness of our image. And you'll notice when you brighten an image like this, it tends to flatten it just a little bit. And that's because we're flattening the curve around the midtone, so it tends to concentrate values there. So what we can do is we can go to the quarter tone and just move that up about 5%. Go to the 3/4 tone and move that down. And notice how that dramatically improves the overall contrast of the image. We're darkening the 3/4 tones, lightening the quarter tones. Now we've set our highlight, our shadow, done overall brightness and contrast, and we used our info tool and something we think is a midtone to help us determine how much overall brightening we should do of our image. There we go. Now our image is pretty well ready to go to press in terms of the values in our highlight, shadows, and overall brightness and contrast.